Welcome to our overview of the Class Aves. The point of emphasis for the Class Aves that we'll be looking at during this presentation are the adaptations and characteristics that Aves have developed in order to fly. Flight is a very important niche that Aves have worked their way into. They're one of the only creatures besides insects and a few bats that can fly. This slide just shows a brief history of the development of aves. It's believed that they came out of the group of dinosaurs and evolved independently of mammals in their major, environmental attempt at finding a strong place to live is adapting to flight. A few of the main characteristics that the class Aves, of course birds, have developed in order to make this adaptation of flight work are, instead of having scales over most of their body, they have feathers, no teeth, again a weight issue, long flexible neck with one occipital condyle, scales on the legs, bones with air spaces, hollow bones for, again, developing for lightness. They're endothermic. They need a lot of energy and oxygen and a four-chambered heart to supply that oxygen. A few of the adaptations of flight, again, are they have honeycomb bones so that they're filled with air, much less weight, so they're lighter. Air cavities, air sacs inside of them, so that they can utilize the oxygen much more efficiently. They're always having oxygen in them even when they breathe out. And feathers, which are extremely light, extremely important adaptations for flight, and the ability for them to push back on the air and pull these wings forward and essentially swim through the air. Here we see an example of a frigate bird, which has a 7-foot wingspan but only 4 ounces in its skeletal mass. Looking at these adaptations for flight, we see in the front part of the birds, flight birds, a large, extra large sternum. This is a major bone that you find right over your heart. This bone is where the flight muscles attach. So if you know from just eating a chicken, some of the biggest chunks of meat on a chicken are the breast portion, and that is actually the flight bone, the flight meat, that flight muscle, I'm sorry, that allows the bird to fly. Also, a long neck enables them to be better balanced as they're flying through the air and landing. Mentioning this long neck, they have 11 to 25 cervical vertebrae, and cervical are the neck vertebrae. Little, light, but many of them, so they can have this long neck to stretch out and help balance while they're in flight. In the skull of birds, most bones are fused, and that allows them to be much lighter than reptiles or mammalian skulls. And for the most part, they're smaller than mammalian skulls too. This slide shows a picture of some of the air sacs inside of a bird attached to the lungs, so that it just shows you some, as they breathe in and out, there's this air flowing constantly through the lungs. The air sacs fill, and then as the air goes back out, that air that wasn't in the lungs but was in these sacs then flows over the lungs, so those lungs can pick up even more oxygen, which is very important for the high oxygen levels they need to fly. Another important adaptation for flight are the wings themselves. These are the forearms and upper arms of reptiles or mammals, same bone structures in there, but we have these long exaggerated feathers, which when curved and used correctly will cause a curving at the top, and then as the air flows over, that gives the bird lift. If there's more air speed over the top, there's less pressure, and that will give the bird the lift it needs to fly. As we mentioned earlier, feathers are very important adaptation for flight. They're very long, they're very, very light, and the intertwining, you see birds pecking at their feathers a lot. They're pruning them and getting them all lined up properly. And they also they're very good for maintaining warmth if they're in cold climates like we have here in winter. Here we can see the feather and a close-up of the feather structure. Shaft, quill, make up the part of the feather we see when we hold it, but then deep down in, when you take a look, there's hooks and barbells and barbs along the shaft. There's all this intertwining, and you can see this matrix is there, but it's mostly air. That's what makes it so light, is this strong inner structure, but it's mostly air. A couple of other weight lessening devices that they have for flight. They have no teeth, as we mentioned earlier. The teeth are fairly heavy things, so they just have a beak. They have no urinary bladder. You might notice a lot of times if birds take off flying, they let something go, some white come out of them. That is feces, but it's also urine, because they can't store it. And as soon as they exert muscles, they let it go. So they also have no urinary bladder to store the liquid in. No penis in the males, and another weight reducing strategy is to have only one ovary. Again, the more important that they can fly, then they can reproduce. As a population, a bunch of them will reproduce, but if one bird lost the ability to reproduce, the population is still stronger because they all can fly. Increased respiration demands of flight is why we have these 9 air sacs connected to the lungs and the centers of the bones. It helps cool the birds, and also, again, this flow of air. Fresh air is always moving through the bird. There's no dead ends as in mammals where you take a breath and hold it. Each wing beat moves air as well. They just never running out of air, because flight is so energy intensive. They need that oxygen. And to be sure, there are some birds, penguins, some ancient birds, ostriches, emus, which have lost the ability to fly. They've adapted to a slightly different niche than flight is required. But they still exist. The elephant bird was 11 feet tall. 11 feet tall, 1,100 pounds, largest egg ever, extinct in about the 1600s. In summary, the most important things about birds, characteristics and adaptations that they've developed, evolved from the dinosaurs, for the most part, are seen in any movement or push towards flight. Reducing weight, feathers, 4-chambered hearts, endothermic, air sacs that help them with their oxygen and breathing, and everything, and then reduced organs like no urinary bladder and no ovary. All of these things help birds to be light and have filled the niche of flight.